They told her the vampire king had never spared a bride. Not one. They whispered it in kitchens and marketplaces, in prayer halls and behind locked doors. Every girl sent to his castle had entered alive, and left only as a story, a warning, a ghost stitched into legend. So when Alara was chosen, no one congratulated her. They lowered their eyes. Her stepmother cried, not from grief, but fear that the curse might somehow crawl back to claim another daughter. The village elders avoided her completely, as if death were contagious. Even the priest who read the decree from the crimson-sealed scroll could not meet her gaze. "You will be married at the next blood moon," he said, voice trembling. "By dawn, you will belong to King Caelric of the Night Throne." Alara did not scream. She did not beg. She had learned long ago that begging did nothing for girls like her. She simply folded her hands tighter in her worn shawl and nodded, because nodding was easier than collapsing in front of people who had never protected her anyway. Alara was used to being invisible. She had been invisible when her father died and her stepmother took everything that mattered. Invisible when she scrubbed floors until her fingers bled. Invisible when merchants spat insults because she smelled of ash and soap instead of perfume. Invisible when boys laughed at her thin frame and downcast eyes. But now, suddenly she mattered. Not because she was loved. Because she was owed. The treaty between humans and vampires was older than any living memory. A war ended in blood. A promise sealed in sacrifice. Every generation, when the moon turned red and the balance shifted, one human bride would be given to the vampire king to keep the peace. This time the name pulled from the ledger was hers. "You should be grateful," her stepmother snapped as Alara packed the few belongings she was allowed to take. A castle. Silk dresses. A king. Alara almost laughed. Instead, she pressed her fingers to the small scar at her collarbone, the one she had carried since childhood, from the night she saved a stranger bleeding in the snow and never told anyone why his blood burned silver against her skin. The carriage arrived before dawn. It was carved from black iron and pulled by horses with eyes like dying embers. The vampire guards did not speak as they escorted her inside. They did not touch her either, as if she were already something sacred, or already something dead. As the village disappeared behind her, Alara allowed herself one silent tear. Not because she was afraid to die, but because no one would ever know who she truly was. The castle rose from the mountains like a wound in the earth. Spires pierced the sky. Torches burned with blue flame. The air smelled of frost, iron, and old magic. Servants dressed in crimson bowed as she passed, their faces carefully blank, their eyes full of pity. They bathed her, dressed her, wrapped her in silk whiter than bone. The gown weighed more than her entire life back home. Pearls lined the bodice. Silver thread traced ancient symbols she did not recognize, but when her fingers brushed them, the markings warmed beneath her touch. A shiver ran through her. "She's trembling," one maid whispered. "Of course she is," another replied. "They all do." Alara lifted her chin. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Far above, in the highest tower, King Caelric stood alone. He wore no reflection. The mirror showed only the chamber behind him, the obsidian walls, the banners of fallen kingdoms, the crown resting heavy in his hands. He had ruled for 9 centuries. He had burned cities, ended wars, and watched empires rot into dust. And still they sent him brides like offerings. His generals believed marriage stabilized the realm. His council believed fear kept humans obedient. Legends painted him as a monster because monsters were easier to obey than kings with doubts. "What is her name?" he asked quietly. "Alara," his commander replied. "Human. No lineage of power. Weak." Caelric's fingers tightened around the crown. "They are never weak," he said. "Only unprotected." The wedding hall filled at midnight. Candles flickered. Nobles watched with hunger disguised as curiosity. Alara walked the long aisle alone, every step echoing like a countdown. When she reached the altar, she did not look at the king. She looked straight ahead. The vows were ancient, spoken in a language she somehow understood without knowing why. When the final words were spoken, the doors slammed shut. Silence fell. They were married. Later, alone in the bridal chamber, Alara stood by the window, heart hammering so loudly she was certain he could hear it. She waited for pain, for claws, for death. Instead, she heard his voice behind her, low, controlled, nothing like the monster she had imagined. "Tell me something, Alara," the vampire king said. She closed her eyes, bracing herself. "Yes, my king?" His next words were so quiet, so unexpected, that her breath caught in her throat. "Did anyone ever ask if you wanted to be here?" And in that moment, Everything she thought she knew about monsters began to crack. No one had ever asked her that question before. Not her stepmother. Not the elders. Not even her father when he was alive, because survival had always come before choice. The idea that her desire mattered felt dangerous, like stepping onto ice that might crack beneath her weight. She turned slowly from the window. The Vampire King stood several paces away, his posture rigid, hands clasped behind his back as if he were restraining himself from something, violence, perhaps, or something far more unsettling. His hair was white as fresh snowfall, falling loose over dark ceremonial armor. His eyes were silver, ancient, and unbearably sharp. Yet he had not moved toward her. He had not touched her. Elara swallowed. Her voice came out softer than she intended. No, my king. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Not hunger. Regret. That is what I thought, Kael'ric said quietly. The silence that followed felt heavier than any scream. Elara's fingers curled into the fabric of her gown as she waited for the inevitable. For him to tell her it did not matter, that treaties were stronger than wishes, that her life was the price of peace. Instead he turned away. You will not be harmed tonight, he said. Or any night. Her head snapped up. I don't understand. No, he replied calmly. You don't. And neither does my court. He moved toward the door then stopped. You may sleep, he added. The bed is yours. I will take the solar chamber. And then he was gone. Elara stood frozen long after the door closed, her knees trembling as the truth settled over her like a fragile blanket. She was still alive. The next morning, whispers flooded the castle. Servants exchanged glances as Elara passed. Nobles stared openly. The absence of screams had not gone unnoticed. By dawn, rumors spread through marble corridors like wildfire. She survived the first night. Impossible. He's never spared one. Elara ate breakfast alone in a sunless dining room, her appetite non-existent. When a noblewoman deliberately knocked a goblet from the table, spilling dark wine across Elara's dress, no one intervened. Careless human, the woman sneered. Did you forget where you are? Elara lowered her eyes and cleaned the mess herself, hands shaking, not from fear but from the old, familiar humiliation. She had endured worse. Kindness had always been her shield. What no one saw was the shadow watching from the archway. Kael'ric observed everything. He saw the way she flinched but did not lash out. The way she apologized for something that was not her fault. The way she thanked servants who refused to meet her gaze. It unsettled him. Centuries of cruelty had hardened him, but something about her quiet dignity scraped against the walls he had built inside himself. Later that day, chaos erupted in the eastern wing. A young vampire noble collapsed, convulsing, his skin turning ashen. Panic spread. He was the king's nephew, untouchable, powerful, and dying. Fetch the healers. They're useless. Elara, passing by with a tray of linens, froze as she recognized the symptoms. She dropped the tray and ran forward before anyone could stop her. He needs his collar loosened, she said urgently. And cold water, now. A guard grabbed her arm. Stay back, human. He's been poisoned, Elara insisted. Silver root mixed with blood wine. It constricts the heart. The hall went silent. Kael'ric stepped forward. How do you know this? He demanded. Elara met his gaze, fear fluttering in her chest, but she did not look away. My mother was a healer. I watched her save lives with less. For a long moment the king studied her. Then he nodded. Do as she says. Within minutes the convulsions eased. Color returned. The noble lived. Shock rippled through the court. That night, Kael'ric summoned Elara to the library. You saved him, he said. Why? She hesitated. Because no one deserves to die alone. The word struck him harder than any blade. From that moment on the castle began to change. Not loudly. Not quickly. But undeniably. Servants bowed lower. Nobles whispered more carefully. And the Vampire King, feared by all, found himself watching his human bride with something dangerously close to reverence. And Elara, for the first time in her life, felt seen. Elara learned quickly that survival in the vampire court depended on silence. Not because speaking was forbidden, but because every word spoken in that castle was weighed, remembered, and often twisted into a weapon. She moved through the halls softly, observing more than she spoke, listening to the pulse of a world that had never expected her to exist within it. The nobles called her the spared bride. Some said it with curiosity, others with contempt. None said it with respect. She was not allowed to sit at the king's side during council meetings. She was expected to stand behind him like decoration, proof that the treaty had been fulfilled without anyone asking how. When disagreements rose, they spoke over her head as if she were a chair instead of a person. Elara endured it. She always had. What they did not notice was how Kaelric's attention sharpened every time someone dismissed her. One evening, a visiting lord from the northern covens openly mocked her presence. A human queen, he laughed, swirling dark wine in his goblet. How progressive. Will she polish your throne next, my king? The hall went still. Elara lowered her eyes, bracing for humiliation. Kaelric did not raise his voice. You will address her as your majesty, he said evenly. The lord scoffed. Or what? Kaelric stood. The sound of his chair scraping across stone echoed like thunder. Or you will leave my kingdom alive, he replied, which is more mercy than you deserve. The lord paled. He bowed. He never spoke again. That night, Elara found Kaelric standing alone on the balcony, staring at the moonless sky. Thank you, she said quietly. He did not look at her. I did not do it for thanks. Then why? He was silent for a long time. Then, softly, because injustice rots kingdoms faster than war. Elara studied him in a way she never had before, not as a monster, not even as a king, but as a man burdened by centuries of violence he could never undo. She saw the loneliness, and something in her ached. Days later she discovered the eastern gardens. They were hidden beneath layers of enchanted glass, a place where sunlight never reached but life still bloomed. Pale roses, silver vines, flowers that glowed faintly in the dark. Elara knelt in the soil, sleeves rolled up, hands dirted without hesitation. A servant gasped. Your Majesty, you mustn't. It's all right, Elara said with a smile. They're just plants. When Kaelric arrived later and saw her laughing softly among the flowers, something inside him fractured. No bride had ever touched his world like that. No one had treated his kingdom as something worth nurturing. That night assassins came. Blades dipped in holy silver sliced through shadows. Guards fell. Alarms screamed. Elara was alone. She did not scream when the door burst open. She grabbed the first thing she could, a heavy candlestick, and stood her ground, heart pounding. The assassin froze when he saw her. Not from fear. From recognition. You, he whispered. The silver-marked one. Before he could strike, Kaelric was there. The room exploded in violence. Blood stained the walls. When it was over, the assassin lay dead at Elara's feet. Kaelric turned to her, breathing hard. Are you hurt? She shook her head. He knelt in front of her without thinking, his hands hovering near her shoulders but not touching. You should have fled, he said hoarsely. She met his gaze. So should you. But you didn't. For the first time in 900 years the vampire king felt fear, not of death but of loss. And he realized the truth that terrified him most of all. He was already falling. After the assassination attempt, the castle changed its posture. Guards doubled. Corridors once open grew tense with watchful silence. Nobles who had laughed too freely now bowed too deeply. Fear returned, but it was different. Sharper. Directed. Elara felt it everywhere she went. Not toward her. Toward the fact that she mattered. She noticed how servants were punished less harshly when she intervened. How disputes were settled faster when her presence lingered near the throne. How Kaelric's generals began to include her in conversations without realizing when it had started. Power, she learned, was not always loud. Sometimes it was quiet enough to be mistaken for kindness. But kindness in the vampire court was dangerous. The council convened under the black sun ceiling 3 nights after the attack. Ancient lords filled the chamber, their eyes glowing with restrained hostility. The attempt on the king's life proves what we have warned, Lord Varkesh said, his voice slick with certainty. The human is a weakness. She invites chaos. Elara stood behind Kaelric, spine straight, hands folded. She did not speak. Kaelric's jaw tightened. She invited nothing. She survived because you hesitated, another lord pressed. Because you care. The word care landed like a blade. Silence stretched. Elara felt it then, the shift, the pressure, the unspoken truth pressing against centuries of tradition. She took a breath and stepped forward before fear could stop her. If my presence endangers the kingdom, she said softly, I will leave. The chamber erupted. Kaelric turned sharply. No. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time saw panic crack through his control. I don't want blood spilled because of me, she continued. I was chosen as a sacrifice. Let me choose something else. Kaelric rose so fast his throne tipped backward. Enough, he said, voice vibrating with power. This council is dismissed. When they were alone, his composure shattered. You would abandon your life? He demanded. After everything? I would protect it, she replied gently. And yours? He stared at her, realization dawning with brutal clarity. She was not weak. She was brave in a way his immortality had never taught him. That night, Kael'ric showed her the truth of his kingdom. He took her beneath the castle, past sealed doors and ancient wards, into a chamber carved with runes older than vampire kind itself. At its center stood a stone basin filled with shimmering liquid. The blood oath, he said. The magic that binds kings to their people. It is failing. Elara stepped closer, her scar burning faintly. Because it was built on fear. He looked at her sharply. Power taken by force always decays, she continued. My mother used to say healing only lasts when it's chosen. Kael'ric laughed bitterly. You speak like a queen. I speak like someone who has nothing to gain from lying, she said. On instinct, she reached toward the basin. The moment her fingers touched the liquid, the chamber ignited with light. Runes flared silver. The air hummed. Kael'ric staggered back as the magic responded, not violently but eagerly. The bond stabilized. Alive. Elara, he whispered. What are you? She shook her head, trembling. I don't know. But he did. The legends. The silver-marked bloodline. The healers who once bridged worlds. She was not a sacrifice. She was a solution. And the court would never forgive that. As dawn approached, Kael'ric made a choice that would shatter tradition. He moved back into the bridal chamber. He did not touch her. He simply stayed. And for the first time since her childhood, Elara slept without fear. The night Kael'ric chose to stay changed everything. Not because of what happened between them, but because of what did not. There was no claim. No command. No blood spilled to seal ownership. The vampire king lay on the far side of the chamber, his presence heavy and protective, like a wall between Elara and every nightmare that had ever hunted her. Word spread by morning. The court was furious. A human bride who healed ancient magic. A king who defied tradition. A bond formed without blood or dominance. To the old lords it was heresy. To the people it was hope. Servants began to whisper her name like a blessing. The lower districts, places Kael'ric had not walked in centuries, stirred with something unfamiliar. Trust. Elara spent her days listening. She listened to servants speak of hunger. To guards speak of endless war. To vampire children who asked why humans feared them so much. She never judged. She never promised what she could not give. She simply remembered. One evening, riots broke out beyond the inner gates. A noble had beaten a human worker to death for spilling wine. Elara saw the body before anyone could stop her. She knelt in the blood-soaked street, hands trembling, grief slicing through her chest. The dead girl could not have been more than 16. Kael'ric arrived moments later. The crowd waited. The noble laughed. She was nothing. Kael'ric did not roar. He pointed. Bind him. By dawn, justice was served publicly without cruelty, only truth. The noble was stripped of rank and exiled, his power erased. The people watched in stunned silence. Instant karma. Elara's hands shook afterward. Kael'ric noticed. You carry too much, he said quietly. So do you, she replied. That night, the scar on her collarbone burned brighter than ever before. Memories surfaced, not hers alone but inherited. Women like her, silver-marked, standing beside kings, guiding rather than ruling. The court moved against her in secret. Poison gifts. Sabotaged wards. Whispers of rebellion. When the final betrayal came, it came from within. The commander she had once saved opened the gates to enemy clans. The castle fell into chaos. Elara was captured. Chained in silver. Brought before the council. You were never meant to live, Lord Varkesh hissed. You were meant to die quietly. Elara lifted her head. Then you never understood the treaty. Before they could strike, the castle shook. Kael'ric arrived like night incarnate. He tore through chains and fear alike, but when he reached her, he stopped. Stay with me, he whispered. She placed her forehead against his chest. I am not afraid, she said. Not anymore. Together they ended the rebellion, not with massacre but exposure. Lies dragged into light. Power stripped from cruelty. The old court collapsed. A new one rose. One built on choice. The kingdom did not heal overnight. Centuries of fear did not vanish simply because blood was spared or thrones were challenged. But something fundamental had shifted. An axis realigned, a story rewritten. The people felt it first. Markets reopened without guards looming over shoulders. Human workers were paid fairly not because they were commanded to be, but because it became shameful not to. Vampires who once ruled through terror found themselves watched, questioned, held accountable. And at the center of it all stood a human queen who never raised her voice. Ilara refused a crown ceremony. "I don't want them to kneel," she told Kael'ric quietly. "I want them to stand." So the coronation was simple. No blood. No chains. No oaths taken under threat of death. Just two figures before the ancient throne, one immortal, one human, choosing each other in full view of a kingdom that had never believed choice could be enough. The final trial came with the blood moon. The ancient magic demanded a sacrifice as it always had. The court waited for Ilara to step forward. She did not. Instead, Kael'ric removed his crown and placed it in the stone basin. "I give what was never meant to be owned," he said. "My power." The magic resisted. Ilara stepped beside him, her scar glowing like starlight. "Power shared does not weaken," she said. "It transforms." The basin flared, then settled. The curse broke. The treaty rewrote itself. The blood moon faded into silver dawn. For the first time in history, no bride died. Years passed. Ilara aged. Kael'ric did not. When the first gray threaded her hair, he touched it like something holy. "You will leave me," he said once, voice barely steady. She smiled. Not yet. When her final night came, it was peaceful. She lay in the gardens she had helped grow, surrounded by life where once there had been only shadow. Kael'ric held her hand, tears falling freely for the first time in 900 years. "Did anyone ever ask if you wanted to be here?" she whispered. He laughed softly through grief. "Every day." When she was gone, the kingdom mourned. But it did not fall. Because Ilara had left behind something stronger than immortality. She had left a standard. Kael'ric ruled on, but not as a monster. He ruled as a king who had been loved. And centuries later, when young girls asked if the stories were true, about the cruel vampire king and the human bride who changed everything, elders would smile and say, "Yes." And that is why kindness is the most powerful magic of all.